Hello and welcome to this training. My name is Daniel Richter from the technical department in CAME Americas. And the purpose of this training is to show how to install and configure the barrier model GARD PX from CAME. So from the basic stuff, it will be like the applications of these barriers. It can be used for single homes, condos, parking garage. It can be in tolls. It can be installed even you can connect two barriers in conjunction to be combined to open at the same time, so they can cover a wider pathway. So, and the GARD PX, it can reach up to 3.8 meters. And it can have 10 million maneuvers between failures. That's one of the most reliable barrier we have. And it's also very fast, by the way. It's like it opens in around from 1 to 2 seconds. It's brushless. The motor is 36 volts. Is an example how it is open. It's very fast. It has a light that has the green and red LEDs. That's optional though. You have to order that in additionally to the barrier. Also, for accessories that are very common is the spring. Well, technically you need the spring, but you need to order additionally. That's my point. There are two types of springs, the yellow one or the green one. They have different strength, depends on the length of the boom. So that's why I mentioned that that's obligatory to buy the barrier and also buy the correct spring, depending on how long it's going to be the boom. The boom comes in 4 meters, but you can cut it. So that's why it has different spring, and you can install it in different places depending on that. And I'll talk more about that later. This is the optional LEDs, the crown and the boom. Like I said, it's as optional. Also the springs that I was mentioning, and there's a battery option also accessory, and there's also a micro switch accessories for telling when it's open and when it's closed. This is the control board. This is a ZLB30. It has many features. You have an Ethernet connection. You have a connection for CAME Connect, and many features. I'm going to talk about more later detail. For now, let's go through technical data. It can be powered by 100 AC or between 100 and 240 AC. It has a switching power supply, so that means that it can not only is very it can switch. It can be connected between 100 and 240 volts, but also it's very efficient because it's a switching power supply. The motor itself, like I said, is 36 volts DC. It's brushless, so that's one of the reasons it's very fast and it's very reliable. The opening time is 290 degrees is between 1 and 2 seconds. It's a continuous operation, so you can open and close continuously without problem, no overheating, nothing. So you can be in a situation where it has high traffic amount. This is the parts description. I'm going to overview the parts. Anti-shred cover, that's a plastic cover that goes on the fastening flange. Then this is a fastening flange that is like a sandwich that attaches the boom to the barrier. It has a boom anchoring plate. That plate is in the barrier itself. That's the one that moves 90 degrees. The cabinet itself, inspection hatch, that's like a cover that you can take out to do the maintenance and installation, get inside the mechanism. And then there's a cover and on the top that you can take it out by a key. It comes with a few keys too, so you can unlock it and also take out the cover. Then the 7, we have the boom release lock knob. That knob, like I said, it has a key. Then you can release that knob and you can turn it and then release the boom so you can move it manually. In 8, we have the control board or control panel. On the top, it has a plastic cover with 4 screws. So one of the benefits is being on the top is that it's easy access. They used to be on the bottom and then on the side, so it was very uncomfortable to do the connections and configuration. Being on the top it makes that much easier. Also, we have the mechanical stops for the boom adjustments. I'm going to talk about more later about that. So it has a spring, auxiliary status contacts. That's a optional accessories for the contacts that I said. And I'm going to skip things that are not that important. Anchoring plate, that could be relevant. The 15, the anchoring plate on the bottom. That plate is if you are going to do a base, like an anchoring base from scratch, you can use that plate to have, so you can attach the barrier there. The idea of that is that if you do a base, it's going to be very flat and it's going to be with also the anchoring brackets and the 16 is going to be very strong connection to the concrete base. But most of the cases, we already have the floor, the case. It could be asphalt, it could be concrete. And usually we do holes and then put anchoring bolts, or you can use bolts for concrete. Either way, anything that is going to attach the barrier has 4 bolts for that. You can connect to the floor. And also the line fuse and the 20, that's a relevant one. That's around where you connect the power. I'm going to show more about it later. I'm doing just right now an overview very quick. This is the parts of the electronic board. So we have the programming buttons. This kind of control board is configured with 4 buttons on a display. This display is actually a graphic display. So it makes very easy to configure everything. So it also has USB stick connector. You can put a flash drive, pen drive, or memory USB that you can connect there. And the idea of that is that you can upload and download the configuration settings that you have in the control board, and also any control remote control that you have configured. And that's like a backup you can do with that. Encoder connector and motor connector 4 or 5. That comes by factory. That comes to the motor. It's a brushless motor. That's why it has 6 connectors there for the motor itself, and also from the encoder and then for a motor. Terminal board for barrier status. That's an optional. You can take the status of the barrier. Here in 7, you can connect the LED strip. It's very simple. Positive RGB. You can connect the LED strip and also the crown. Accessories fuse. Obviously, a fuse for the accessories. I'm going to talk about the accessories power later. There's a terminal power supply for the control board in 11. In 11 and 10, actually, is where the transformer power comes from, the transformer to the control board. So that's I want to, if the control board doesn't work or the motor doesn't work, you can check the voltage in here. It's around 24 in this one, 24 and 0, and 30 and 0 is around 30 and 36 volts, should be. So we have the fuse of that, we have the fuse for the motor, and I think this is the most relevant ones from the control board. The one that I want to mention here is that it has an RSE, that it has a 1 and 2. There's 2 RSE connectors and slots. I want to mention that it's like a serial communication to accessories and other barriers. So there, and this one has 2, RSE1 and RSE2. Okay, it shows like it's a slot for a small card, RSE card. So you're going to use the serial communication in the first one. You have to put the little small card there, and you can connect the accessories in this connector A, B, ground. And if you're going to use the same for the RSE2, you have to put the RSE card in the slot and use the connector A, B, ground, but for the second slot. So there's 2 serial ports that we have basically. And you can connect another barrier, so you can use and combine function, and you can use Common Connect. There's other accessories that can use on that protocol. So I'm going to talk about more later when you connect 2 barriers, but I wanted to mention that. And you can connect keypads, antennas. You can connect this one is relevant, 23. 23 is an AF card. It's over here. That's if you're going to program a remote control, you need to install an AF card that allows you to receive the signal from the remote control. So you need to keep in mind, if the installation requires adding remote controls, you need to buy the small AF card and install it in the control board so you can later learn the remote controls. Another accessory like similar to that is the connector for the clock card. It shows here in 26, and 26 is over here. And similar in that case, but this one is a clock. Like I said, it's like that keeps the time and date, and that way you can configure for open and closing from certain days and times. You can use a timer basically, a timer for opening and closing automatically at set times and dates. So if you want to enable that, you need to install the clock card in this slot. That's one feature that this barrier has. So this is a typical installation. We cover the basic parts. Obviously, it has a barrier with a boom, has a reflective bands. The bands can be in the boom, so it can be seen better with the dark. As a boom itself, the warning lights, we usually have some kind of warning or indicator of what it's doing. In this case, we have in the PX barrier, we have the LEDs that we mentioned before, the red ones that goes red and green. Photocell support, depending on what photocell you use, and the photocell cell. We recommend to putting 2 pairs of photocells, one of each side, like it shows here. And the reason is that way we cover the entire danger zone, basically, or danger point. So if it's a card closed, it's not going to close. And you can configure that. I'm going to show later how to connect and configure that part. Column for the photocell. Obviously, on the other side, there's a sending device, and the other is a receiver. And the way we do it is like that because it's more reliable. Instead of using the reflector, there are photocells that you can use that has a receiver and sender in the same device. It has a reflector on the other side, but that's not very reliable. So that's why we now use only photocells with a receiver in one side and the sender for the other side. And fix the support. The support is recommended if you have an arm or boom that is around 6 meters or more. In this case, the GARD PX is not really that necessary, but if you feel that you don't want the boom to bounce too much or there's a lot of wind, you can use the fixed support if you want. And ground loop in barriers is very common to have a ground loop. That's optional, obviously, to detect on a car. It has a electromagnetic interference, so it detects metal basically. And if it detects metal, it detects the car. You can set it up to do many things. One of the things, a free exit maybe, to do a pulse to open the barrier when the car is there. Or we can use it for safety, like for example, if the car is there, don't prevent the boom from closing to the car. Also, we can use it for close immediately after the car leaves. It depends on wherever you put it and how you configure. I'm going to talk about more about that later. For a control device, we obviously have a way to open the barrier. It can be an access control, it can be a remote control, it can be a keypad, it can be anything, depending on however you connect it, and obviously the control device itself. This is the danger points. So keep in mind that we talk about mechanical parts and electricity, and so people don't go under the barrier, and also the squashing places where you don't put your hands. So keep that in mind. Now we go through the installation. We need the base. If you need to do it from scratch, this is the suggested measurements. And if you're going to do the base from scratch, also we suggest to put the pipes for the cables to be under so you don't see it outside. If in that case you have to do it, we suggest doing has a mesh so you can have a strong base. And you use the plate that we talked about earlier as a base with the flanges and like a little fingers that goes inside the concrete. That way it's going to have a strong attachment to the floor. One of the things I want to mention in here is that it has to be a very flat and level floor where you have to attach the barrier. I mention this because sometimes we see there's a ramp or maybe it's not regular, the floor. So somehow you have to figure out that it has to be very flat and level to avoid problems. We've seen problems that sometimes it's in the air and it flex, the cabinet deflects a little bit, and that would cause problems later on. So remember, be very flat and very even. And so here shows the ideal way you put the base. And now we're preparing the barrier for installing it. We need to open the cover, the top cover, and then the hatch has a cable for the earth in here. And we get to in the base, you put the bolts and the washers, obviously the same way. So you can install it and open to the left or open to the right. That's one of the things you have to decide in the site. Usually we want the part that shows the attachment of the boom looking to the other side from the ongoing traffic. So if you hit the barrier, when a car hits a barrier, it's going to the outside. So it's not going to bend it to the barrier. So that's why we will select to open to the left or open to the right, depending on the situation also. One of the reasons you put it on the right or left, the situation will be putting the arm obviously in that position because it turns 90 degrees. You put it either way. And the other difference is that you put the spring in the opposite side. That's basically the only difference. The rest is just configure the control board to tell if you open to the right or open to the left. I'm going to show about that later. Once we have selected what side we're going to install it, we can install the boom. One of the things to install the boom is that it has a support in the inside, but it's very short, so you have to make sure that support is in the part where it's going to be installed in the barrier. And remember, the boom is hollow, and one of the reasons that when we do the sandwich with the metal parts, we don't want to squash the entire boom. It's not going to be very support, so that's why it has a support inside, and you just make sure it's in the side where it's going to be installed in the barrier. Once we have that, you put the bolts, obviously the Allen key. And once we have that, we recommend if you have to cut the boom, you can do it doing the measurements. Maybe it's 3 meters, for example. Then the barrier comes with a 4-meter boom. So if it's 3 meters, obviously cut 1 meter. And there are all the parts that you have to install. They say usually inside in the hollow arm, it comes inside, and you have to take it out and slide it in. It basically comes by pressure. There's a rubber band on the bottom, the yellow one. It just slides it there, and the covers for the LEDs. And if you don't have LEDs, still you have to put the cover. And in the same way, there's a cover from the tip of the boom. It's a plastic cover with 2 screws. And same for the entire cover. Covers the mounting of the entire boom. Here's the holes for recommending where to put the spring. Like I said, it has 2 springs. You have to choose which one depending on the length of the boom. If the boom, for example, is less than 2 meters or is around 2 meters, you have to use the yellow spring. And you have to, in here, they suggest put it in B or A depending on the length of the boom. And same for the green spring. So this is a suggestion that you have to use for where to put the spring. The spring has like a bolt with the screw, so you can put it on the bottom. Same for the top, and you have to put it in like a hook in the bottom. It has a hook, so you put the spring. And the idea of the spring is that to balance the entire boom, the weight goes in the spring. We want the motor only to move the boom, but not to support the weight. The weight should be held by the spring only. So one of the reasons one of the ways we make sure it's that way is that we release the boom. Like I mentioned, it has a knob on the inside or outside. It doesn't matter which one. Just release the boom so you can move it manually and put it at 45 degrees. And if it stay there, it means it's balanced, and so You don't have to do anything else. You just have to put out like this bolt. You have to attach it very tight so it doesn't move by itself. But if you leave it 45 degrees and you leave it and it goes up, it means it has too much tension and you have to release it, turning the spring to one direction. So you can release the tension of the spring. And the idea is to leave it 45 degrees and stays there. And the same thing, if it goes down and you leave it and it goes down for 45 degrees, it means that you need to put more tension and so turn the spring to the other direction. And the idea is to keep it 45 degrees. Then you tie it up with a nut and it should be fine. Once we do that, we need to adjust the position of the physical stop. Basically, it's a physical stop that stops this base that moves 90 degrees, obviously. And this for the horizontal, you have a bolt that attaches just where it hits the limit, and you can adjust it obviously to have fine tune the perfect horizontal position. Once you do that, there's a bolt that you can have to tight. So tighten it up so it doesn't move by itself with vibration. And same for the vertical position. But in vertical position, we recommend to get it to 89 degrees instead of 90. The reason is that we want the weight for it to be on the same side always. There to have less movement to the other side, to have less play in the gears. So it helps to keep the very reliable and durable barrier. So put it 89 degrees, adjustable to get it there. And once you finish, there's a nut that you can tighten so it doesn't move by itself with vibration. Now that we have that done, we can do the connections, and this is the power. We can connect the 120 between 120 and 100 and 240 and 30 volts. We connect it here. This is the power supply, the switching power supply, and you can turn on. This is a switch, and once we do that, one thing I want to mention is that the big connector, the control board has a big connector where you have many connections, and I didn't mention much later there, but I'm going to focus now about that. In that connector, you can have power for accessories. The pin 10 and 11 is very useful because it can power. It always gives 24 volts AC, DC, and it delivers 40 watts. So any accessories that you have, you can connect it between 10 and 11. 10 is positive and 11 is negative. And once we have accessories all power on, we can do commands. The way we do commands is with normally open contact. Is we do that with the common and another other pin. The common is pin 2. You can take note that always pin 2 is common. And with the common, we do a pulse between that and some other pin, and that way we give a command. The most common one would be between 2 and 3. If you do a pulse there, remember, just a normally open contact, just a short pulse, like 1 second or 2 seconds. Between 2 and 3, if you do a short there momentarily, it's going to tell the barrier to open and only open. If between 2 and 3, P is going to open, but only the master if you have two barriers connected. So if you have two barriers connected that work together, if you do a pulse between 2 and 3, it's going to open both. If you do a pulse between 2 and 3P, it's going to open only the master in that case. If you do a pulse between 2 and 4, P and 4, it's going to close. And if you had two barriers, it's going to close both. If you had a common between 2 and 7, it's going to alternate. It's going to open, and if you do a command again, it's going to close. So open, close, open, close. And the one in red is that I'm going to talk about last is a safety feature to disable the barrier. If you enable that feature, by default is disabled. But if you enable that feature, that contact between 1 and 2 has to be connected. If you open that contact, it's going to disable the barrier. And if you have the LED, it's going to actually blink red to indicate that the barrier is disabled. And so keep that in mind. If you enable that feature, you need to keep that contact closed. One of the reasons we use that feature is maybe a button to disable the barrier. A button that you push is going to cut the contact. And when you have to pull to the button. You have to pull it to connect the connection, enable the barrier. That's one of the reasons. Another reason could be if you want to do the open the barrier only if that gate opens. We use sometimes that kind of features. It's very useful in some situations. And so this is the indicators, how you connect the indicators, the lights. You can connect the indicators, for example, in between 10 and 5. There's an indicator if it's closed, it's not going to give voltage. And if it opens or is between any open or close, it's going to give 24 volts. So sometimes I use that for putting a relay and doing like indicator of in the various open or close. And this is the connection for the LED strips, positive RG. This is the safety devices. Obviously, safety devices like photocell or ground loops. Barriers usually use ground loops or photocells. So it's two basic stuff that you have to connect. Is the power and the normally closed contact. The power, like as mentioned before, you can give between 10 and 11. 10 and 11 is always 24 volts. Same for the ground loop. You connect to the matrix on the ground loop, 10 and 11. And the normally closed contact has to be between the common, that is 2, and one of the 3 inputs that we have. Those 3 inputs, you can connect in either way, and you can configure in any way too. So for example, if you connect the input between 2 and CX, you connect the output of the photocell, it has to be a normally closed contact. That's one of the things that you have to keep in mind. It has to be a normally closed contact between 2 and CX. For example, if you connect to CX. And CX, for example, you can configure in many options. The common options would be, the most basic is the C1. That's super basic and very useful opening, during closing. It means that if it's closing and it detects an obstacle, it means the contact opens. It's going to stop and open immediately. Basically, if it's a car is there or a person, it's going to stop and open again. That's the most common option, C1. Another common option in barriers, especially with ground loops, is C5, is immediate closure. That means that if the car is there, it's not going to do anything, but if the car leaves, it's going to close immediately. Remember, Mesta has a normally closed contact. So it always has a contact. When the car is there, it opens the contact. And the car leaves and closes the contact. And the last common option that we use sometimes in barriers is a C13. That's basically those 2 combination of opening during closure and immediate closure. It's a combination of both. So if the loop is under the boom, the barrier is going to prevent the barrier from closing to a car. And also, and the moment the car leaves, it's going to close immediately. So that's a very useful feature. So now we go through the programming. We program everything with the inputs and all that. I'm going to mention the basic stuff. Like I mentioned before, it has 4 buttons. It has escape, that's going back from the menu. It has a left and right arrow that you can navigate with the menu, and press enter if you want to confirm a command or you want to get to the menu. Also, if you are not in the menu, you can open and close the barrier using the arrows. That's one useful feature for testing. So one of the things I recommend when configuring the barrier is using the guided procedure. We call it also wizard. That one is going to give you step-by-step through all the basic configuration. Is one of the things that we do, and basic configuration, also I want to mention that right now, is opening direction. Remember I mentioned that you can open to the left or open to the right. Well, you have to tell the control board where you connect the boom the spring, and to open to the right or to the left. By default, it's open to the left. So if you open to the right, you have to just go to configuration. In the main menu, you have to press enter once to get to the menu. Then you search for configuration, press enter, then motor settings, press enter, and open direction. Once you press enter there, you have to choose to the right or to the left. As simple as that. And step 2 is telling the barrier how long is the boom. We have only 2 options. You do the same, go configuration, motor settings, boom length. You tell the 3 meters or 4 meters. as simple as that. And the last basic step is the travel calibration. Remember that the motor has an encoder that way it knows where the boom is, the position. And once we finish doing all the adjustments and the spring and the balance and all that, we do a travel calibration. So we only do it once we finish the installation, to tell the control board how revolutions of the motor do when it's doing the entire travel. So that way you can do the slowdown perfectly and also detect obstacles better. It's very important that you don't skip this step. Actually, you should not skip any of these 3 steps. Now we're going to talk about the optional steps that are very useful. For example, safety devices. Usually you should have a safety device, at least one. So like I said, it has 3 inputs that you can put the safety device, CX, CY, or CZ. If you connect the device, for example, CX, you go to configuration, wire safety devices, then CX input, and then you will select the option that you want the input to do. In this case, you can put C1, C4, C5, C7, C9. Like I mentioned, the most common one is C1. The other one common is C5, and the other C13. That is a combination of both. And you can configure it either way. We also have configuration times. Configuration times, you have automatic close. That's by default is disabled, but you can set up to close automatically. After a few seconds, you can set the amount of seconds that it's going to stay open and then close. Then we can do the manager add control, remote controls. Also, you can add maybe a code in a keypad. We call it new user or adding users. We call that to remote controls or keypad codes or any device similar to device. So if you're going to add a remote control, go to manage users, then new user, and then you select what you want the button to do or the code to do. Usually we use step by step, that is open and close. So if you press the remote control once, it's going to open. If you press it again, it's going to close. Open and close. Sequential, we use it especially for gates, other kind of gates like swing gates or sliding gates. That's for open, stop, close, stop. So you have a possibility to stop the barrier in any position. But in barriers, we don't really use that option, but it's there. And very common one is that also only open. If you press the button, it's going to open only. If you press it again, it's just going to open. And I guess you will set it up to closing other way, like automatic closing. But anyway, you have to select what you want the button to do. And then you press enter and press the remote control itself to memorize the code or the signal. And then you have it working. Once you have all that, you can do a data backup. Like I mentioned, it has a USB connector. You can put a flash drive, memory USB, or a pen drive, and you can do a backup of all the memory of the settings and also the remote controls. Especially useful if you add many remote controls and you want to swap control boards. This is very useful because you don't have to add all the remote controls again. So you don't have to do everything from scratch. And the setting is, like I said, configuration, external memory, and then you can save data or read data. As simple as that. This is one of the things I wanted to talk about is combined operation, meaning we connect 2 barriers to work together. Like I mentioned before, we connect those 2 barriers using a serial port, basically, that is called RSE, and we have 2 ports, RSE1 and RSE2. If you're going to connect 2 barriers, we use RSE1, and to use those ports, we need to connect the RSE card that I mentioned before. So you put the card so you can enable that port or connector, and you can connect A with A, B with B, and ground to ground. That's all the connection has to be between 2 barriers. That way, the master, you can connect the safety devices, you can connect to the master any commands, all that is going to be on the master. And the slave only going to have power and these cables that we're talking about here. And also the slave had to have the RSC card, obviously, to enable that port in the serial. So that's important to know that if you're going to connect to barriers, remember to also buy the RSC card. And this is the usual way you configure combined operation. And like I said, it has a master and slave, so they open at the same time and they close at the same time. And you have to give the command only to the master. Another way you can open is only open the master. If you do a pulse between 2 and 3P, that's at a partial opening. We call it partially open. It only opens the master. So you can also control not only open both, but also you can control only opening one. Another way that is very useful sometimes in some situation is to do a configuration for doing alternate operation. That means that they're connected the same way that I mentioned. Two barriers are connected the same way, but you set it up to do an alternate operation. It would be the master will, if you do a command for open, and will open normally, and then you set it up to close maybe automatically or maybe a loop that closes the gate. And when it's closed, automatically it's going to open the slave. We call it here B. It's going to open that one automatically so the car can go. And once that closes, maybe with automatic closing or maybe a ground loop, it allows the A one to be able to open. So the A is not going to open until the B is closed. Once the B closed, now A is ready to get a command to open. It's not going to open up by itself. And this is very useful for some situations where they don't want two cars to pass at the same time. Some cars get close to the first one and that way get in. And if you some places they don't want that to prevent that from happening, so you use two barriers in this way. So that way to set it up, it used to be very complicated with some relays and cables and some tricky situation. And these new barriers, we just have to connect. We set the configuration RSC communication. RSC1, we pair it is the combined that we mentioned first, that they open at the same time and close at the same time. And alternate is the one I mentioned right now. It's like the one opens and then when it closes, opens the other one. And then when that closes, it gets ready to the other one to be open. So you have those two options that are very useful. To finish, and we have the error messages that you might get. Calibration error will be if you're doing a calibration, for example, and there's a safety device that is have the contact open. It's going to give you that error. Then you can set up, the menu has all the errors. I don't want to take too much time. And the last thing I want to mention is the maintenance. Remember, every 500 cycles or 1 year, we suggest to do a basic maintenance, check all the nuts and bolts, check the valves of the spring, lubricate the spring, lubricate any moving part, and that is the outside that you can see. Outside the mechanism, taking out the hatch, obviously. Check all the warning lights, that all the safety devices work, micro switches for the cabinet work, and all the basic stuff like there's no oil leaks in the gearbox. And every 2,500,000 cycles, or every 2 years, we suggest to replace the spring. That's only to prevent problems in the future, because the spring obviously has some wear, so we suggest to replace the spring. So thank you for your attention. I hope it was helpful. We're always doing videos and trainings all the time, and you can always call us to have questions or problems. We always try to help. You can also by email. And remember, you always can get the manuals online, docs.kame.com. And so, okay, so see you on the next time. Bye-bye.